Well, today I'm here to talk about AI-PGF, which is not only a program for builders, but a movement at the intersection of exploring AI and public goods funding. Just for reference, who here needs funding? Who needs funding bad? Oh, wow. Okay, all right. I'll catch you guys later on that. A little bit background about me. I'm Plug, aka Shot. I'm focused on supporting teams and builders across the near ecosystem, really specialized in kind of grants, funding mechanisms, and also open source contributions. I'm at also the Near Foundation low-key, focused on public goods, and founder of Potlock, and also a steward for AI-PGF. And you could follow me on Farcaster, Lens, Near Social, at PlugRel, and hopefully make an agent of me based on my open social data. And so here is ultimately the vision we're trying to build for. Imagine a world where you could get funding automatically as you build something users want. A lot of you here are founders looking for funding, and often we see ourselves not even just spending time focused on funding, but even at times having a whole co-founder spending 1 to 3 months or 3 to 6 months raising venture capital, raising grants, and it's honestly a huge distraction and different incentive alignment to actually building a product that users want. So ultimately, through AI-PGF, through building out this open funding stack, we're looking to not only solve the problem of making it easy for founders to find funding, but people with treasuries to actually find the teams that are qualified as well. And so at the same time, building a lot of these funding mechanisms and these allocation tools, I found that governance is really hard to scale, and there's too much processes there. So this is why we kind of pivoted, or not even really focused on the AI agent part of the stack as of now, because we can build all the funding mechanisms and contracts and toolings to allow anyone to allocate funding, but ultimately, if it doesn't reduce overhead and provide that business value, what's the point? We're just essentially, a lot of times the blockchains, we're building a lot of barriers to entry rather than talking about the problems at hand. And we noticed a few trends happening in the ecosystem in Web3 and general tech. Well, firstly, we see the growth of AI. Now, especially the past 2 years, LLMs are actually disrupting administrative work. They may have not necessarily taken jobs, but you just saw Luis actually use AI for the development of projects. People from every part of the professional life are actually using AI right now to reduce overhead and save money. And then already, automation is prevalent in Web3. We have MEV bots. We have so many different tools that really make blockchain a prime ground for programmable incentives and money. And at the same time, now more so with Web3 than in Web2, we have more data about funding and open data. Blockchain provides a source to provide information about traction, past grants data, and there's a bunch of people building in the space so that we have visibility not only on venture funding, but grants and subsequent traction. At the same time, ecosystem funds are huge, and people ask, why are you focusing on public goods funding or funding in general in the Web3 space as opposed to Web2? Everyone needs funding at Web2 as well. And the reality is we're at a very early start of AI, and it's really hard to get traditional foundations and traditional VCs to actually experiment with AI in the context of funding. At the same time, if you look at all these different ecosystems, and this is just non-EVM blockchains. When a blockchain is started, they usually have a token, and that token supply is allocated towards an ecosystem treasury. And that ecosystem treasury is usually distributed through funding and grants. And if you look at just the non-EVM top 20 blockchain market caps, and then look at their ecosystem treasuries, we're talking almost $100 billion that we can experiment with to give out to builders. And a lot of times, the projects that go to these ecosystems are the same projects. So not only having context on how they're progressing in near, but how they're progressing in other ecosystems is very, very relevant as well. So this has a huge potential in terms of cost savings if we save 10 to 20% on the operation budget for managing these grant programs, which is honestly the usual overhead of what it takes to run a grant program. And at the same time, I think a lot of these foundations and these crypto companies are very open to experimenting with kind of building out at the intersection of AI and grants. At the same time, here's some things we also noticed that agents yield better results when working together. You saw right now in Bitte's example, to generate a swap, you had to get a price discovery tool and concat it with other agent. And if you want to make it a DAO proposal for a swap, you have to plug into the DAO tooling. So agents are just like humans, where each individual agent is kind of a subject matter expert, and they work together to produce these more experienced teams. At the same time, we see agents broken down composably. They can tackle a lot of the problems outside of public goods funding. So in the context of building a due diligence agent to check whether grantees are doing their milestones or even doing the things that they said they did, this can be used in venture capital. This can also be used in banking and other use cases, but as an open individual agent, can be tapped into this public goods funding use case. And then at the same time, agents are only as relevant as the data that they're privy to. Right now, we've reached the deflection point in AI where most of these foundational models have already indexed public information. So it's important that not only we set up these new data pipelines that are open, but we start leveraging private information. So I'm really excited about NILN and the integration that are coming soon. At the same time, open source limits vendor lock-ins, and it also speeds up collaboration and iteration. And I'm a big proponent of open source, and one of the key pillars about user-owned AI is actually building open systems that people can interact with. So here are also some challenges and some limitations of AI-PGF. Like, handling funds is really scary. Also, the metrics can be gained, and we have a lot of external dependencies on APIs for like Twitter data, LinkedIn data, Crunchbase data, so many external sources that we have to put in context for funding AGI. It makes it really difficult to build this system. Also, there's a really hard timelines to understand a specific ROI, even without AI. So how do we know if a project is successful? And knowing that is a multi-year, maybe even a decade time horizon. And so although we can see whether a project that is receiving funding would have gotten funding from subject matter experts and human evaluators, we don't necessarily know whether that was affected of a long-term time horizon. And there's a couple of ways we can limit this, but I'll kind of go into like where we're at in AI-PGF as a movement in here. And this is kind of how I look at the evolution of AI-PGF. So right now we're at demoware. Like, we have things that look cool and that demonstrate the power of AI, but they don't necessarily plug into larger systems. That's where we're at right now. We're very early on this. And then eventually we'll have many agents, and this is kind of the phase that we're in. So different parts of the grant workflow and the funding workflow, essentially building agents around this, and then kind of pipelining them into data pipelines where they can continuously learn and then have context with on-chain information and off-chain information to kind of optimize that workflow, and then eventually plugging into a multi-agent workflow where now you have an RFP agent that develops RFP, you have an application submission agent that submits the application, you have an eval agent, and you kind of have these workflows where eventually you can actually build a whole end-to-end funding pipeline and then experiment with the microgrants program where you actually have an agent giving out grants autonomously with a small amount eventually at a funding AGI that can give out grants and allocate funding better than a human can. And so that's the vision, and we are just at demoware. And my main point of this talk isn't to tell you what we built and what we're building. It's honestly to inspire you how you can start tackling a lot of these cases and then what actually it looks like in here. And so this is kind of a little bit of breakdown of different stakeholders and different parts of the grant workflows that can be built. And also, even within these workflows, you could build multi-agent systems and then apply them to different use cases. I mentioned earlier, even having diligence on teams, you could build a whole company around that individually. You can build a whole company around getting qualified leads in the ecosystem. So I'm primarily looking for projects that have a business use case with this particular workflow that's willing to build open agents and then pipeline to the overall funding AGI. So we have a few case studies. If you want to actually see what's being built, all the open source repos, if you go to AI-PGF.com/explore, a lot of people have been building a lot of cool stuff. Right now, primarily, we're working also on an agent framework to more easily deploy funding agents. Like we've built agents on Potlock, a Potluck agent on Bite. There have been people who've built agents for determining budgets for proposals, for evaluating proposals, for evaluating eligibility to grant program, to checking Twitter and using tools like Masa and other partners you've seen here to actually do diligence on projects. So many people are building different parts of the pipeline within our ecosystem, but also externally as well. And we've gotten pretty good reception from the overall funding ecosystem of kind of using AI to ultimately reduce this overhead. So yeah, what to build? I'm always very for giving guidance for builders on what to build. If you go to AIPGF.com/ideas, all of this is a public board with requirements of exactly what you could tackle and also any relevant projects and information there. So yeah, if you want to find more information on that, if you go to AIPGF.com, you can actually, we have a kind of small builder grants program for this, but we also have these agents here, and then pretty soon we'll be deploying our agent playground. So this is a little bit about what we're building at Potluck. Right now, I talked a lot about the funding agents layer, but we're actually building a whole stack for anyone to deploy end-to-end funding solutions. So this is funding distribution at the contracts layer, the identity layer, the incentive mechanisms, impact tracking, and building it all up on social, and then building different agents and applications on top of that to interface with this stack. So yeah, we're also coming out with Potluck V2, actually beyond just quadratic funding, so anyone could actually deploy their own mechanisms on there, but stay tuned for that. So yeah, here's a call to action. If you are a funding program and you want to experiment with the intersection of AI to reduce overhead to fund your builders, if you're a builder, build AI-PGF with us. And if you're a dreamer and want to replace your job with AI, which is the primary reason of what I'm trying to achieve, because I think work is overrated and I'm trying to not have a job, yeah, hit me up.